Shalom, family. This is Initiation into Yoga, Chapter 9, Religion and Philosophy. Philosophy is a word which formerly had a much wider significance than it now has, and included under the heading Natural Philosophy all of what we now call science. Gradually, however, the term has become limited to speculative reasoning about the ultimate nature of the universe in its various aspects. It is true that a follower of Hegel would give a different answer to the question, what is philosophy, from that which will be given by, say, Bertrand Russell, but in a general way, we may say that philosophy means in Europe speculative reasoning about the universe, whether on a basis of accepted principles of a priori held to be valid or on a basis of observed facts, and is an attempt to arrive at an understanding of the universe through the use of the discursive reasoning. The classical systems of Indian philosophy start on a different basis altogether. The Sanskrit word usually translated as philosophy is darshanam, which literally means seeing, and the Indian systems start neither from a priori principles nor from the observed facts as usually understood, but from some transcendental experience in which the truth about the nature of the universe is directly perceived. What is usually called the philosophy is an attempt to give a coherent and logical account of the world as thus perceived in terms that will be both intelligible and convincing to a given hearer. It is a rational demonstration of the truth seen by the original rishi or seer, and with it is taught a practical method by which the pupil may acquire a realization of the truths demonstrated. It is this claim to direct experience on the part of the teacher and to the possibility of such for the pupil that makes the widest gulf between the Indian and European systems. In the fact, in the latter, no hope is held out of that the pupil will ever arrive at more than an understanding of the truth, whether one believes with Berkeley that a spade is an idea in the mind of God, or with McTaggart that it is a colony of souls. The practical result is the same as if one believed with the crassest realist that it is just a spade, whereas when the author of the Bhagavad Gita says that all is Vasudeva, the indwelling spirit, he is saying something that he means his hearers to verify for themselves, and on which they will be able to base their whole lives and practical outlook on the world. In the ancient world, there was no divorce between philosophy and religion. Religion found its culmination in philosophy, and the latter drove down deep roots into religion. Between the two, there was constant communication so that philosophers could expound religious truths to the common man, and the latter could look up to the former as to one who saw clearly the truths that for most were shrouded in symbolism. This was true even in Europe, where such men as Plato and Plotinus were not ashamed to speak of the gods, and though there was much in contemporary religion that they disapproved of, much that was superstitious and must be disapproved of by any man of knowledge. Their philosophy was rooted in religion, just as much as was that of Sanskracharya in India. Nor was this fact at all detrimental to their philosophy, for so eminent a modern philosopher as Whitehead has stated that the whole of European philosophy may be described as a series of footnotes to Plato, a remark which shows how true and lasting was the latter's philosophic thought. In India, we have only to think of such great names as as Shankaracharya, uh, Nagarjuna, Vasubhandhu, and Ramanuja to realize how intimate the connection between religion and philosophy has grown in this country. For all these men were both great religious teachers and great philosophers. In later times in the West and in that part of India that takes its cue from the West, all this has been changed. One can hardly think of for the better. Philosophy divorced from religion has become a mass of epistemological technicalities, while religion, cut off from philosophy, becomes for the most part an unappetizing mixture of infantilism and superstition. This tendency is spreading gradually even in India, and nowadays many people seem to follow that the proper way to write philosophy is to bring out a learned and technical monograph on the Vaibhashika theory of perception, or the Advaita view of inference. Of course, these topics are, like any other, legitimate playthings for academic specialists, but those who seek from philosophy knowledge of that which have known all else is known will no more find it in these unprofitable verbal subtleties that they will find it in the empty rituals, the blind dogmatics, and the infantile emotionalism of Orthodox religion. That philosophy should become a purely academic pursuit is bad enough. It is infinitely worse than religion should be the happy hunting ground of tearful hysterics, of eloquent gas bags, and of neurotic persons with mother fixations. We have seen, we have even seen people haunting the steps of the Mahatma, who was literally a babbling idiot, in the hope that some of his senseless prattling might reveal the hiding place of buried treasure. All these extravagances come from the neglect of philosophy, which, with its pure mountain air, disperses all the fog of folly and superstition and summons us to a bracing effort to find the truth for, by, and in ourselves. But the philosophy which can do this must be a real philosophy and not the verbal cobwebs of the schools, for the latter remain in elegant constructions. For what will it profit a man to be able to prove in words that reality is composed of ideas, or tables and chairs are colonies of souls, when the mind which has the idea is an obstinately uncontrollable as ever? The tables and the chairs are resolutely inert as those of any materialist. For God's sake, let us get away from words and plunge into the heart's deep core, the well at the bottom of which, as old symbolism tells, truth lies buried. It is only when philosophy comes from the heart that it will appeal to the heart. All else is but words, a tale told by an idiot, mm, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. We hope to close the chasm which at present is widening between religion and philosophy. How far we shall be able to do so will depend on our contributions, but it is felt that if it can be done at all, it will be here in India, where the great traditions is not yet altogether dead. Philos- Philosophy, if it is to be real love of wisdom and not mere epistemological hair splitting, must not divorce itself from the practical and emotional discipline of life that constitutes the heart of religion. But that is not enough in itself. If philosophy is not to stultify itself, it must make strenuous efforts to keep free from only two common systems of rationalized beliefs fashioned to support this or that socio-political system. All around us, we find philosophy being pressed into the service of political and religious creeds. There is one characteristic common to all these creeds: their adherents, whether communists, fascists, imperialists, or even ordinary religious believers, wherever and whenever organized religion has any real power, are all and always ready to do violence to the minds and bodies of other people in order to compel their adherence. The free play of the mind, its very lifeblood, is offered up in sacrifice to the local Moloch. And it makes no difference at all whether they call that Moloch the great god Stalin, the great god Hitler, the great god Mao Zedong, or the great God of Orthodox religion. The result is just the same. Violence is always the same, and he who wishes to be a philosopher must renounce violence of every sort once and for all. By suitably curving and distorting a mirror, it is possible to make it reflect points that are widely separated in space as though they were close together, and vice versa. But all that has been achieved is a distorted and false reflection that is useless as a guide to reality. The actual facts are not altered. Similarly, by allowing play to the subterranean forces of desire, it is possible and indeed only too easy to distort the mirror of the mind so that things which are not true appear as if they were. This happens whenever we use the intellect to prove the truth of some proposition, when the plain fact is that we merely wish to believe it true. It is always possible to prove to our own apparent satisfaction that it is right that individual welfare and indeed all human values should be sacrificed to the defied nation or to some theoretically divine social system, such as proofs attained by doing violence to the mind always carry with them a compensating disbelief, a sort of inverted image buried deep beneath the shining surface of the mental mirror. Hence, the violence with which men are ready to impose their beliefs on others, a cold, inverted image of the moon, like the face of a frowning man, of a drowned man, is forever dancing mockingly beneath the waves of their hearts. The idea that violence can bring about a solution of any problem is thoroughly unphilosophical, and yet behind so many thought systems of the world, idealistic, materialistic, or religious, lies the appeal to violence. Potential, if not actual, mental, if not physical. So we get the spectacle of men of different nations all ready to kill and each other over maim each other in defense of their own unique interest, and all forgetting that the web of life is one and universal. To defend our own women and children against the foreign devil becomes a sacred duty. one which is best performed by inflicting on the enemy's women and children just those abominations that we find so monstrously inhuman when practiced on our own. For the philosopher, there should be no such ridiculous mental antagonism, uh, instigmatism. With what is true in one direction is also true in the other. A philosopher who cannot rise above the limitations of the particular viewpoint at which he finds himself by birth is no philosopher at all. His study has been in vain if it has not given him the power to judge the truth of a belief, to estimate the righteous, to estimate the rightness of an action, irrespective of whether that belief or that's action are or are not calculated to bring immediate benefit to his country, the country in which he happened to be born. Sinister attempts are made to destroy all freedom of thought and to force the minds of men into predetermined channels. Such attempts are bounded to fail because the human psyche will not suffer violence and strain indefinitely. Within all hearts is the free and deathless Atman, resistless like the ocean against which men build their puny dams in vain. The Atman works through the hearts and brains of such men as offer themselves in its service. One of the most sacred duties that is laid upon us is this present epoch is to preserve such freedom of thought as we have inherited from those who have gone before, to strive our hardest to enlarge its boundaries and to resist unswervingly all attempts to destroy the most precious jewels in the world, the freedom and the power of man's unconquerable mind. Accounts of Hindu Muslim strife and bloodshed are depressing reading for all who believe that the true function of religion is to bring unity to men and not strife. It is true that many other motives that purely religious ones are always involved in such conflicts, but all history shows that nothing can give a sharper edge to the baser passions of humanity than the stupid belief that they are being sanctified in the service of some God. There is no cruelty more remorselessly inhuman than that of the fanatical priest, and no stupidity more gross than that of the ignorant believer. It is no wonder that many have urged the abolition of all religion as a prime source of human suffering. But religion cannot be abolished. It springs from a source deep in the human heart, and if it is destroyed in one form, it immediately rises up again in another. Russian communism and German Nazism proclaimed war on Christianity, but in doing so, they have been transformed into religions themselves, with all the typical religious apparatus of uh, defied leaders, inspired Bibles, and irrational fanatical enthusiasms. Religion is essentially a mode of feeling and not a matter of intellect. This is why religious apologetics leaves such an unpleasant taste in the mouth, since the apologetic writer is not using the intellect on its own plane and according to its own laws, but is forcibly constraining it to justify beliefs held on quite other grounds. The stultification of the intellect by constraint gives rise to the feeling of fundamental dishonesty that always assails us when we peruse such writings. On the other hand, when the intellect is allowed to function alone, abstract upon its own level, we get philosophy with its purely intellectual truth and its lack of influence over the rest of the human psyche. The failure of the philosopher to put his philosophy to any practical use is proverbial and arises from this very fact, namely that the feeling aspect of the psyche, not having been consulted in the framing of the philosophy, will not allow its forces to be used for its support in actual life, so that for all his lofty thoughts, the philosopher is only too often forced back in practice upon instinctive feeling prompted actions that may be utterly at variance with his philosophy. Hence, the accusation of sterility in practice that has always been brought by the common man against philosophy. In the case of the ordinary, orthodoxly religious man, the pseudo intellectual structure, if any, that he has raised is plainly a falsity. His actions being motivated by feeling of the specific type we call religious. But it is just here that his difficulty lies. Religious feeling, as Jung has somewhere pointed out, wells up from the springs that are both muddy and clear. On the one hand, there is the source in the supermental level of the Buddha, and on the other hand, there is that which arises from the submental desire nature. The former feelings lead to unity and self transcendence, while the latter drag man deep into the bog of mere animality. Hence, the paradoxical behavior characteristic of many religious men, at one moment soaring to an empyrean of devotion and self sacrifice, at another sinking to subhuman levels of cruelty and bestiality. The only means of discriminating between these feelings is to be found in the mind, which forms a neutral point between the two. If properly used and disciplined, the mind is capable of separating these things from each other and of refusing the assent of the will of to the one sort, while yielding is while yielding it freely to the other, of rejecting the bestial through definitely religious feeling that men get through participating in such acts as blood sacrifice and religious murder, while encouraging the higher religious feelings of love, compassion, and self sacrifice. The ordinary religious man, however, through having constrained his mind to the justification of any feeling that has the religious sanction of tradition or that is approved by our holy scriptures, has lost the power of such discrimination and yields himself to the lower with as much abandon as to the higher. Indeed, with more, for it makes less demands upon him. This characteristic is particularly noticeable in religious crowds whose sacred ferocity has been the cause of many deeds of horror from which even the individuals who shared in them must have afterwards shrunk. Lastly, when the vested interests of priesthood conceive themselves to be involved in the maintenance of such subhuman piety, we get the abominations of persecution and the inquisitions, while in other quarters the cry is raised of acraces l'infamy. In the Kathopanishad, the body of man is described under the figure of a chariot. Of that chariot, Buddha is the charioteer. mind the reins, and the in, indriyas, or senses, including the desire nature which energizes them, are the horses. The chariot will only travel properly when all these are used correctly. When the Buddha guided, mind restrains and directs the exuberant energy of the horses. Ordinary religions dispense with the reins and makes no, or at least insufficient distinction between the feelings that are rooted in the Buddha and those that belong to the desired nature, and whenever the latter have the specifically religious qualities or can claim the sanction of a sacred tradition, the horses are allowed to run away with the chariot, and tradition is substituted for the reins of mind. Academic philosophy, on the other hand, tends to retire into a universe of abstract use, discarding the element of feeling as pre- um, prejudicial to the exercise of pure reason. This is like continuing to play with the reins while the bits have been removed from the horse's mouth. The occupant of the chariot abandons himself to wonderful dreams about the journey he is making, while the horses nibble the grass by the roadside or scamper wildly in the fields with their contemplative passenger. Thus, neither religion nor philosophy, as these are ordinarily understood, can be sufficient by itself. The former, because it subordinates the mind to the feelings indiscriminately, or to tradition, which is another name for the same thing, and the latter, because its mental workings, are detached from the great instinctive driving powers of life. It is for this reason that a union of philosophy and religion is so essential, a union in which the mental discipline of the former shall control and purify the instinctive traditional feelings of religion, while the latter shall energize the lifeless intellectual structures of philosophy. Only when this is accomplished shall we see a philosophy which actually influences life, and a religion which neither sinks into abyss of holy sensuality nor indulges in cruelty in the name of the service of God. One of the greatest snares in the religious world is the delusive idea of orthodoxy. The unorthodox Hindu, Buddhist, Muslim, and Christian are able to meet together in friendship and mutual respect, even in the religious sphere. They are willing not only to live and let live, but also to sympathize with each other's faiths, to try to understand them, and even to learn from mutual interchange. Once, however, the demon of orthodoxy raises its ugly head, all this harmony disappears. It doesn't matter which of these great religions the man belongs to. As soon as he becomes infected by the desire to be orthodox, he erects a barrier between himself and his fellows. It is true that the barriers of unorthodoxies are more prickly and forbidding than those of others, but essentially they are all the same. Those within are true believers, and the rest are infidels, lelichas, heathens, kafirs, or turthikas. Not only with regard to other religions, even within the limits of a given religion, orthodoxy sets up barriers and creates ill feeling. The more orthodox a Roman Catholic is, the more he hates Protestants. The more orthodox uh, Vaishnava, the less he will have to do with Shaivas. Thus, each religion gets split up into a number of conflicting sects, though it should be obvious that this process decreases the probability of truth being found in any of them, since the smaller the sect, the less likely would it seem to be that it alone should possess the truth, while all the rest wander in error. The fact that orthodoxy thus sets barriers between man and man in an excellent reason for its avoidance, since all such dividers of human unity drag the soul deeper and deeper into the power of the great divider matter. He who would lead the spiritual life must learn to assimilate himself increasingly to the fundamental nature of spirit, which is unity. Moreover, if we glance at the conditions under which any of the great orthodoxies have risen, we shall see that there are also very good reasons why that which is orthodox should never be the truth, and vice versa. For what is the process? A great seer arises, one whose wisdom so far exceeds that of ordinary men that the latter are apt to consider him a god. In truth, but he is but a man, as all are, save that he lives no longer in the separate ego, but in that divine and all-pervading spirit which is the ever-living heart of all that is, and he has thus become an incarnation of its wisdom. Such a divine seer imparts to all men whatever they are able to receive of his wisdom. But since capacities differ, he by no means teaches all in the same manner. All teaching is in symbols, and not only will the symbols used vary from hearer to hearer according to their differing types and needs, but also the meaning of those the self same symbols will vary according to the degree of the hearer's individual spiritual insight. We read, for instance, that when Buddha addressed a crowd of men, which of them felt that the words were addressed peculiarly to him alone, that was because the words of such a teacher, springing as they did from the depths of the universal spirit, touched something deep in each man's heart, so that they seemed specially adapted to his own personal problems and difficulties. All who have had the good fortune to listen to a real seer, even though a less exalted one than Christ or a Buddha, will have noticed this phenomenon, which is rooted in the very nature of spiritual insight and so is strictly universal. But then the seer withdraws from his personal ego to live forever in that selfless spirit, which is the one true self. As we crudely put it, he dies. His and his disciple and his disciples see him no more. They collect together to memorize or write down the teachings they heard from his lips when he was with them. We must never forget that we do not possess the actual teachings of the founders, but only such of them as were handed down by their followers and formed into canons or orthodox bodies of scriptures. And it is just here that the difficulty begins. Men of deep spiritual insight are always rare, and the deeper the insight, the rarer it will be. The majority of the disciples will be men of ordinary insight, and their voices will prevail at the council's call to determine the faith. Speaking more accurately, the men who come to the front and whose opinions prevail at such councils, we can actually see the progress at work in the history of both Buddhism and Christianity will be those men who, while possessed of more than average strength of character and intellect, yet have the same degree and type of spiritual insight as has the ordinary disciple, and so can satisfy the latter by giving to his feelings of coherency and an incisiveness that he himself would not have been able to obtain. The Christian Gnostics and inheritors of Christ's inner teachings divided men into three types, which they termed helic, psychic, and pneumatic. Those whose inner values are material, emotional, mental, and spiritual, respectively. Among any bodies of disciples, it will be the middle one of these types that is most numerous, a fact which is at true of of the disciples of a present day teacher as it was in the past. The opinions of the relatively few men of deep spiritual insight, the pneumaticoi, will therefore receive scant attention at the councils, and the forces of jealousy adding their sinister quota to the innocent depreciation caused by failure to understand. The inevitable result will be that those few who have the deepest understanding of the Master's teachings will either be forced into silence or else expelled from the church of heretical. This is what happened to the Gnostics, who were expelled, persecuted, and finally stamped out by the Catholic Orthodoxy, simply because their understanding was too deep for the average church father. It appears also to have happened at the Second Council of the Buddhists, at which it would seem that those who understood most of the spirit of the Buddha were forced to secede and separately hand on the traditions which afterwards became the Mahayana. The Orthodox account makes the split depend upon certain petty matters of monastic discipline, but then that is the Orthodox account. Not only is there reason to suppose that this is what did happen, there is reason to know that it is what must have happened and must always happen, since it is a process based on the universal characteristics of human nature. There is no question here of an actual esoteric doctrine imparted only by a few chosen disciples. That is a further problem which, with which we are not just now concerned. We are not we are not just now concerned. We all have a note here is that spiritual insight is inevitable, esoteric, and aristocratic, while the councils held to determine orthodoxy and democratic are unpopular. Someone perhaps objects that the Buddhist councils were composed of arhats, enlightened seers. Yes, and yes. And the Christian ones were composed of saints, but let that pass. Those who do not wish to see will never see. But it should be obvious to anyone of intelligence that the process described above is inevitable. While human nature is what it is, and that is the inevitable result is the creation of a body of orthodox doctrine and interpretation which satisfies the man of mediocre spiritual insight just because it was created by such and for such. Get that out. Excuse me. It is no less obvious that it is useless to expect to find the deepest spiritual truths in these established churches. The latter are tolerably suited to the needs of the ordinary religious man who uses his religion mainly as a lubricant to help him over the roughness of life. Beyond that, They are of little use, except is so far as their rituals and symbols unknowingly preserve ancient and forgotten traditions, such as the rocks preserved the fossils of extinct forms of life. Their claim to possess the truth is false, and their quarrels with each other are childish, resembling nothing so much as the disputes of small boys about the importance of their respective fathers' places in the world, a matter of which they know nothing whatever. Even the lubricating oil they furnish for the average man has to be paid for heavily because of obscure, uh, the obscurantism, and selfish cunning found in priesthoods who raise the cry our holy religion is in danger, when all that is in truth endangered is their own comfortable position in human society. That's the seeker after spiritual knowledge, the traveler on the real inner path, should begin to look about him with very wide open eyes if he finds himself lying in the bed of orthodoxy, a bed which only too often is one of the most of those sinister constructions found in some medieval inns, the canopy of which descended in the night, smothering the unfortunate wayfarer beneath its weight. The only safe place for the traveler is of this path is the open road of the heart, the only safe shelter, that of the limitless skies. Traveling thus, like a true sannyas, with no baggage to encumber him, seeking no security beyond that of his own self, demanding nothing of gods or men, but content with whatever comes, avoiding the crowded haunts of men and never wasting a day by lingering in the comfort of yesterday's halting place. In this way, faring ever northward, guided by the light of the pole star, he will surely reach the fixed abode and see the midnight sun that shines in darkness. There and there only will he find the true religion, reflected gleams of whose light gave whatever life they possessed to the creeds that he has left behind, a religion which existed before men were on this earth, one in which there are neither churches, priests, nor God, since nothing that is pointed out for worship can be the one true root of all that is. Man's extremity has been said to be God's opportunity. If that were altogether true, the deific morals would have a rather dubious flavor and be something like those of a prison chaplain who plies his wares to a man who just completing a spell of solitary confinement. Yet it is certainly a fact that in times of extremity men do turn to religion, if only as a frightened child runs to its mother's lap to receive the soothing caress and the assuredness that all is well. On the other hand, the philosopher with a toothache is notorious. His philosophy deserts him, or rather, he deserts his philosophy and ramps about the house, showing in his pain rather less con- rather less self-control than the ordinary man who has never toyed with ideas that pleasure and pain are mere illusions of the senses. Why is it that in periods of stress, religion grows stronger and affords a welcome, if often largely superstitious support, while philosophy is apt to be a reed which breaks in the hand? The reason is that while for most men philosophy is a matter of the intellect alone, religion throws down deep roots into our instinctive life. Do, Do not men learn their religion at their mother's knees? And is it not only natural that a terrible and hostile world should send men back to those same knees for protection? For philosophy, however, there are no such easily attained protective arms, but a stern call to the facing of facts as they are. There can be no appeal to the mysterious ways of an inscrutable providence, but only a determined inquiry into the nature of the horror, a tracing of the evil to its roots in our own hearts. And if the philosophy is to be more than the academic intellectualism nowadays dignified by that name, a steady effort to destroy those roots, this is a task for grown up men, and there is still too much of a child in our natures for it to be an easy one for us. To see this, we have only to note how, under the stress of illness, sometimes even a trifling cold in the head, our behavior takes on the fretful and peevish characteristics of a spoiled child. Religious preachers are never tired of expatiating on the contrast we have just sketched, though the moral though the moral they draw from it is not altogether the one which we ourselves are drawing. Nevertheless, the fact remains that no religious martyr dying in the supporting arms of a fanatical faith has surpassed the calm heroism with which the philosopher Socrates went willingly to an unjust death, entering the waters of the gloomy and terrible river with such a quiet and manful dignity that the beholders must have felt if they could not actually see his safe arrival on the other shore. Clearly, it is not philosophy that is to blame, but philosophers. It is because our philosophy is an affair of our heads and not of our hearts that it is for us so often a broken reed. We construct systems, or more usually, merely criticize the systems of others. We manipulate and pallid abstractions that we call ideas, proclaim that the real is the rational and the rational is real, assert that the objects of the world around us are only ideas, or going to the other extreme, deny reality to anything that is not perceptible to our senses. But it is not so. The real is far more than the merely rational, the world far more than mere ideas, while sense experience is but a picking up of ocean flotsam. Ideas are no more than whole of reality that a railway timetable is the railway, and sense experience is no more the entire world, the whole content of a of the fathomless ocean. For those waves, some seek refuge in the parental arms of emotional religion. God's in his heaven, all's well in with the world. Others in the textbook mentalism of a purely intellectual philosophy. These trenches are not on my map. They can't be real. Both alike are haunted by the demons they fear to face. The former by the lurking doubts that, after all, the divine protecting arms are but human, all too human. The latter by the thunder of great tidal waves that find no mention in the official almanac. It is not behind emotional or intellectual defense mechanisms that we can find security. It is in the open that we must meet our foes. Man's strength is in the soul, and he who would stand firm amid the tides of fear and sorrow must seek and find the pathway to that soul. If religion or philosophy are to be of any real importance, they must be such as will set our feet on that pathway and must give us comforting beliefs, not intellectual opinions, not even firmly adhere to convictions, but that inner and certain knowledge that burns up sorrow as the fire consumes chaff. That divine knowledge of the soul, that penetrating insight into the nature of the thing, into the nature of things as they are, into the modes of their arising and their passing away. That knowledge exists now as it has always done, now as in ancient times, there are those who have mastered it in all its fullness. Now, as always, there are those whose eyes are learning painfully to open to its divine light. Religious traditions and or philosophical adventurings that can give us any guidance to that path are the most valuable possessions of the human race. Their study and even their mere preservation are among the most valuable of all human activities. As for the rest, the philosophy and religion that are mere refuges from reality. The religion that is a parental head patting for a frightened child, and a philosophy that is a mere arena for academic gymnastics. All these have little, if anything, to do with that pathway. They are mere actions and reactions to of the human personality, having as much real significance as Turkish baths and crossword puzzles. Let us look into the hearts and say in which category of our own category our own philosophy and religion are to be found. Philosophy and religion are the two modes under which the human psyche apprehends the universe. They are the most general manifestations of the thinking and feeling functions, respectively, and they must be wedded to each other if the resulting apprehension is to be a healthy and harmonious developed offspring. It will be seen that we understand the terms philosophy and religion in somewhat wider sense than is current nowadays. Science, for instance, is most essentially a mode of mental apprehension, but we have made no separate mention of it. It is only quite recently that the one sided mentalism of our age has allowed science to aggregate to itself the title of scientia, or knowledge excellence, and to set up house independently. Previously to that, mm, excuse me, previously to that, under the name of natural philosophy, it lived happily, as it were, in a joint family, and its setting up for itself of an establishment of its own is only an example of the unfortunate separatism of the age in which we live. Had science not been so eager to proclaim itself an entirely independent mode of knowledge, we should not have seen so frequently the lamentable spectacle of scientists writing about matter and causation as if Hume and similar thinkers had never written their critiques of those notions. We should, in fact, have had less of that ignorant scorn for a metaphysic that is constantly betraying scientists into writing nonsense. For no metaphysics is simply bad metaphysics. Moreover, had science not yielded to the separatist spirits of the times, it might have been less ready than it now so often is to prostitute itself before the uh, lecherous nationalist idols, and mankind thus would have been spared much suffering and more shame. By separating itself from the main tree, scientists have definitely weakened everything except its egotism. Just as science and naturally, excuse me, just as science or natural philosophy is a special branch with special aims and methods of that mental apprehension of the universe, which constitutes philosophy in general. So art, which has also disastrously enlarged its ego at the expense of truth and harmony, as a branch of the feeling mode, which is what we understand by religion. Here again, parental dogmatism was the root cause of the splits. Excuse me. Those who sat in the seats of the hierophants had nothing sacred or otherwise to show. And the artist who, in India, Egypt, and China, as well as in medieval Europe, had been a happy son of the temple, was forced to start a sect of his own if he would escape sterility. As for the philosophical and religious pontiffs who sit on the academic and ecclesiastical thrones, they whose mouths are gray with mumbling the dust of 1,000 books, their days are numbered. Jung remarked that the universities were ceasing to be centers of light, and assuredly few now think of consulting the ecclesiastics on any important matter. It is they, the pontiffs of both sorts, whose learned dogmatism has shattered the unity of the tree of knowledge. But even now, a wind is stirring in the unsleeping depths of the psyche, which will blow them away and scatter their dust to the four quarters. Only when this has been accomplished will it be possible again for the true Hierophants to show forth the sacred mysteries of life and death, and for the tree of knowledge to put forth once more its unities of foliage from its buried but undecaying roots. The penalty which has to be paid for fission in the psyche is neurosis. And just as the gray and lifeless materialism of the age is the price we pay for the scientific succession, so the fantasies of contemporary and allied cults are the neurosis which result from the artistic one. The psyche is one, and though divisible, is not with impunity to be divided. To think great thoughts about the universe, or to luxuriate in warm but purely personal feelings is no substitute for its integral apprehension by the psyche as a whole. It is well that we should find time to pause and remember that the world is a thing in itself has no existence. We mean that there is no such thing as a solid globe of Earth spinning its way on an orbit around another globe called the Sun in an attached, self existing, and quite impersonal manner. Now, notwithstanding all that may be written by scientists upon the natural order of such a globe, there is no such thing. The name Earth is given to a certain way of looking at reality, a certain partial integration of reality made under the forces of desire, and therefore springing from ignorance. The description of it as a globe, as as moving on an elliptical orbit are convenient schematizations of our experience, but they are no more than that and should not be taken as such. Springing out of it, they are tainted by the ignorance which gave them birth. The very ground under our feet supports us not because of any inherent solidity, solidity it possesses in its own right, but because it is a misperception of all of the all-supporting Brahma. This was the lesson which the gods were taught by the mysterious Yaksha, the supreme or absolute being, in the Kinopanashad. Without the hidden power, Agni, fire, could not burn a straw of war, nor Vayu, air, blow it away. They went at it with all speed, but were unable to accomplish anything at all. We have been told that because of the Atman, earth supports, water moistens, and fire burns. We have been told this. We piously repeat it on suitable occasions, but we do not believe it. And whenever possible, we forget it. Forget it just the word. Forget is just a word. All forgetting is more or less deliberate. We forget a thing because we do not wish to remember. In other words, forgetting springs from desire. What desire? In this case, the desire for personal safety, the desire to establish our illusory personal egos firmly and, so to say, on a solid earth in a world that is changing around us at every moment. It is this desire that leads us to see the seamless garment of reality as a thing of shreds and paths, as cut up into so many staples, or at least relatively stable, objects which by their mere enduring can reassure us that we too endure. This is why we like to surround ourselves with a host of familiar objects, and why the older we get, the more apt we are to dislike their being changed or broken. Their, their impermanence reminds us too painfully of our own essential transiency. But there are no such objects in reality. There is no earth, no water, no air, no fire. There is no floor on which we sit, no paper on which we write, no hand which guides the pen, no separate self which guides the hand. This is neither philosophy nor poetic rhapsody, but just truth. All these things have sprung out of the desire for stability. That desire is based on ignorance, because only the Brahman is stable, Dhruva, and only in that Brahman can we find a fixed abode which we ignorantly and hopelessly seek elsewhere. Deep within us there is that which knows this. Our superficial ignorance is of it is asleep and a forgetting. And we forget it just because we wish to live a life of separate selfishness. All such wishes are doomed to ultimate frustration because they go against the nature of reality, which is one without a second. If we assert if we assert the right to live as separate beings, and we can make this assertion just because in us is the power and freedom of the Atman, which is our heart. We must pay for it by being tied fast to the chariot wheels of fate. As Christ said to Peter, we gird ourselves to go whither we wish, and in the end, we are bound by another to be taken whither we wish not. Lightly we leap into the sunny air of separate life, and heavily do we fall back into the dark waters of death. This is the the weary, the misery laden. But as the Buddha states in Arnold's poem, we are not truly bound. The will has no reality, for in truth separation itself is unreal. By our desires, we have ourselves created that gloomy will on which ourselves are broken. That will we call the world, but it is nothing at all, nothing but a phantom, called into being by the wand of desire. Moreover, the nature of the phantom while it lasts, and this is the important thing for us to remember, corresponds to the nature of the desires that call it forth. The world we live in today may seem to be quite different from the sort of world we would have wished to live in, but it is not so. We took only we look only at the bright and sunny front of our desires, turning away hurriedly from their dark and gloomy backs. But all things are twofold. If they have a brightly lit front, they have a back which is correspondingly dark. This is the inevitable nature of the manifestation. No artificialities of flood lighting can remove the shadow. The artificially bright scenes of the theater, for instance, have a behind of quite particular ugliness. Therefore, we say that the world in which we are at present living is the exact correspondence of our desires. If those desires be seen in their entirety, we cannot desire in terms of violence, even if of only mental violence, without having that violence thrust back upon us by the phantoms we have created. All worlds whatsoever are worlds of sorrow, dukkha, in some form, because all worlds are all are called into being by desire. This present world of ours, so particularly hideous with murder and destruction, is the inevitable result of the lamentability, unbalanced nature of modern life. This is shown in the way in which the destruction particularly affects those filthy ant heaps that we call our great cities, for it is in them that life has taken on its most unbalanced forms. Neither is it of any use to protest our innocence and to lay, as is our wont, the blame on the other fellow. What we have not had a hand in the making of cannot impinge on us at all. It is true that there are degrees of individual responsibility in the matter, but there are also corresponding degrees in the extent to which the resultant situation impinges upon us. There is no luck or chance about the process, but only the unerring hand of karma. As a man sow, so shall he reap. And he who wields the sword of violence in his thoughts shall see that sword menacing him from the so called outer world, the world which is made up of the phantoms we ourselves have evoked. This is the truth. As from a blazing fire shoot forth thousands of sparks, so for so from the imperishable issue forth all beings, and to it they return. What is the wind that blows them forth? It is the wind of desire. From that wind and its resonant effects, there is no shelter in any of the phantom worlds, but only in that of which Gaudapada has written. There is no destruction and no coming into being, none who is bound, none who strives, no seeker after liberation, none who is liberated. This is the highest truth. Whoever desires to be a practical philosopher, said the great Paracelsus, Paracelsus, ought to be able to indicate heaven and hell in the microcosm and to find everything in man that exists in heaven or on earth. He must be able to turn the exterior into the interior. But this is an art which he can only acquire by experience and by the light of nature, which is shining before the eyes of every man, but which is seen by few mortals. The universal teaching of the seers, as well known to the writers of the Upanishads, as also in the tantric schools, who place the seven worlds and all their denizens within this 6 foot human frame. It is a teaching, however, which modern man tends to turn away from. If he is a philosopher, he looks at it askance as a relic of God knows what ancient superstition, and he prefers to busy himself with formal inquiries into the nature of sense data or the structure of logistical propositions. Ask him what is within man, and after quibbling for an hour or so on the meaning of within, he will say that in all probability and according to the views of Professor Tweedledum, there is something abstract termed a mind, but that it is just possible that Professor Tweedledum may be right in holding that so-called mind is only a complex or conditioned reflexes. As for anything else that may be with us, that may be within us, he will politely refer us to the doctor, nor will the religious man he found much more helpful. The age old hostility between the priest and the magician still makes itself felt, if only subconsciously, and he feels that religion should be a matter of simple faith in a benevolent providence, nourished, perhaps, hold on a second, excuse me, by some thin gruel of intellectual theism. Heaven and hell. Oh, yes, after death, no doubt. Heaven for me and hell for you. All very proper. But don't let us talk of such depressing subjects. What is within man? His immortal soul? Atma? Or what not? What is that soul? Well, we don't really know. But it is something very spiritual, too spiritual, in fact, to be described. The interview concludes with the offer of a loan of his particular sacred scriptures for us to study. As for the practical man, he looks for truth in telescopes and microscopes and in millions and millions and in laboratory wonders in general. He will, of course, refer us at once to the doctor who is himself writ large and who, with knife and in one hand and stethoscope in the other, will give us an answer with which amounts in the end to what the nursery rhyme calls slugs and snails and puppy dogs' tails. And Paracelsus, yes, he was a member of our profession and a great man in his day. Discovered the circulation of the blood or the stagnation of the bile. I can't quite remember which, and no doubt but by heaven and hell he simply meant health and disease. It seemed there is no one willing to take Pericles seriously. Yet the latter is giving utterance to a truth which is of the utmost practical importance, and which at one time was understood by the wise of all nations. It is ignorance of this truth that is responsible for the mist of unreality, which has spread over all modern learning. What Pericles termed the nature of the termed The light of nature has, since his time, been hidden even more zealously behind a rampart of books in front of which the scientist, as high priest of this age, peers through telescope and microscope microscope at meaningless stars above him or meaningless atoms beneath, while religion and philosophy perch on his shoulders, nodding wisely at each other like two owls. But Paracelsus was entirely right. There is a sun above us in the heavens, and there is also a sun within these mortal frames. Sun, moon, and planets weave their intricate patterns in the sky above us, and no less do they weave them in the tissues of our bodies and in the subtler tissues of our psyches. Within us are all the gods, and without their power, not the slightest movement of our little finger, not the most conditioned or conditioned reflexes could take place. The gods, we repeat, shine above us in the sky, and the same gods shine within us in the ether of the heart. As Thales said, all things are full of gods, and on a knowledge of their hierarchies must be based all true sciences and all true arts, all philosophy and all religion. From the gods come healing for the body, for the same God's healing for the soul. From them comes knowledge of the past, present, and knowledge of the past and future. From them, the power to mold the living present. Long ago, this great truth was known to all men, consciously to the wise few, and instinctively to the many. We have forgotten it, and this forgetfulness is the deep-rooted cause of all our modern unrest. Only when we rediscover the gods in ourselves shall we be able once again to see them in the outer world as well. Only then shall we become what Celsus terms practical philosophers, and only then shall we attain once more to that inner and outer harmony of being that we have lost. Only then, too, will theology cease to be the tissue of empty words, which it is at present, and become again the queen of the sciences, the knowledge of those shining powers whose life is manifested at this universe, as this universe. Above them and below them, there is nothing. Above the nothing of the divine darkness, below the reflecting nothing of matter. Between these two nothings extends the whole living web of the divine tapestry, the fabric of the universe, the gleaming garment of the divine play, the golden patterns of the ever moving planets, circling against the background of eternal stars. And that is the end of chapter 9, Religion and Philosophy. And that is the end of the book of Initiation.